You know what finally made me rethink how I set up my own shop? It wasn't a new tool. It wasn't a fancy jig. It was finding out what wasn't in someone else's shop. A few years back, I started studying the Mia Daiku, the traditional temple carpenters of Japan. These are the craftsmen who built wooden structures that have been standing for over 1,000 years, and when I started learning how they work, I kept noticing the same thing over and over. It wasn't what they used that surprised me, it was what they refused to use. Tools and materials that I reach for every single day, things I assumed were essential, they consider harmful to the work. And once I understood why, I started seeing my own habits completely differently. Today, I'm going to walk you through 7 things you will never find in a traditional Japanese woodshop, and the reasons behind each one might genuinely change how you think about your craft. Plus, stick around to the end because I'll share a grain reading technique I picked up from this tradition that takes about 30 seconds and saves hours of frustration. Let's get into it. The Mia Daiku represent one of the most disciplined and refined woodworking traditions that has ever existed. And what makes their methods so valuable to us today is that they aren't theoretical. These techniques have been tested by time, literally by centuries of standing structures. Once you understand the thinking behind what they reject, you start to see that these aren't arbitrary rules. They're practical decisions backed by a deep understanding of how wood actually behaves. So let me give you some context on who these craftsmen are and why their opinions carry so much weight. The Mia Daiku are a specialized class of Japanese carpenters whose primary work is building and restoring temples and shrines. Their lineage goes back well over 1,000 years. The Horyuji Temple in Nara, Japan, is one of the oldest surviving wooden structures on the planet, originally built around the year 607. And it's still standing, not because someone went back and reinforced it with steel brackets. It's standing because the joinery and the material selection were done so well that the building has survived earthquakes, typhoons, and over 14 centuries of seasonal movement. The philosophy that guides Mia Daiku work can be summed up in a principle they take very seriously. Respect the nature of the wood. Every board has a history. It grew in a specific direction, in a specific climate, under specific stresses. And the Mia Daiku believe your job as a craftsman is to understand that history and work with it, not against it. When I first encountered this idea, I'll admit I thought it sounded more like poetry than woodworking. But the longer I studied their methods, the more I realized it's the most practical approach to the material I've ever come across. Everything they reject, every modern convenience they refuse to bring into the shop, comes back to this one idea. If it overrides the nature of the wood, it doesn't belong. So here's the first thing you'll never find in a Mia Daiku workshop: sandpaper. This one shocked me at first because I think most of us consider sandpaper as fundamental as a tape measure. But traditional Japanese woodworkers don't sand their surfaces, they plane them. The final surface on a piece of Mia Daiku work comes straight off a kana, a Japanese hand plane that's pulled rather than pushed. And when that blade is properly sharpened and the plane is tuned right, the surface it produces is something sandpaper simply cannot match. Here's the science behind it. Sandpaper works by tearing and scratching wood fibers. Even at 220 grit, you're creating thousands of tiny scratches across the surface. A sharp plane blade, on the other hand, severs the fibers cleanly. The result is a surface that actually reflects light differently. It has a depth and a glow that sanded wood never achieves. I tested this myself on a piece of hinoki cypress, planed one half with a well-tuned kana, and sanded the other to 220 grit. The planed side looked like it had a finish on it. The sanded side looked flat and dull by comparison. The Mia Daiku see sandpaper as an insult to the wood because it destroys the very surface the tree spent decades growing. The second thing you'll never find is metal screws or fasteners. Not a single one. Every joint in traditional Mia Daiku construction is held together entirely by wood meeting wood. No screws, no nails, no bolts, no metal brackets. Their joinery is so precisely fitted that the joints actually become stronger over time as the wood seasons and tightens around itself. And there's a very practical reason beyond philosophy. Japan is an earthquake zone. Rigid metal fasteners create stress points that crack and fail under lateral movement. A well-cut wooden joint, like a mortise and tenon with a slight wedge, has just enough flex to absorb that movement without breaking. The joints in the Horyuji temple have survived seismic events that would have shattered a bolted connection. When I started experimenting with leaving metal fasteners out of small projects, I was nervous at first. But once I committed to cutting tighter joints, I found that my joinery skills improved faster than they had in years. Nothing motivates precision like knowing there's no screw coming to save you. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these ancient methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Kenji's Workshop, and it is a collection of 100 ancient Eastern woodworking secrets for the modern craftsman. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. The third item you won't find anywhere near a Mia Daiku shop is synthetic. Glue. No yellow glue, no epoxy, no polyurethane adhesive, nothing that comes out of a bottle. This goes back to a core belief that the wood itself should provide all the strength a joint needs. If you need glue to hold something together, the joint isn't cut well enough. That's a humbling standard, but it's one that produces extraordinary results. There's also a deeply practical reason for this. The Mia Daiku build structures that are designed to be disassembled and repaired over generations. A temple might need a single beam replaced after 300 years. If everything is glued together with permanent adhesive, that repair becomes destructive. Without glue, a skilled craftsman can take a joint apart, replace the damaged member, and reassemble it without harming the surrounding structure. When I thought about this in terms of my own furniture projects, it completely changed my perspective. How many times have I glued up a chair knowing that if one rung fails in 20 years, the whole repair becomes a nightmare? The Mia Daiku plan for the next craftsman, not just the current project. Number 4 is power sanders and rotary tools. This extends beyond just sandpaper to the machines themselves. You won't find a random orbit sander, a belt sander, or a rotary carving tool in a traditional Mia Daiku shop. Every surface is worked by hand with edge tools, planes, chisels, and spoke shaves. The reasoning is partly about surface quality, which we already covered with the kana, but it's also about control and sensitivity. When you're working a surface by hand, you can feel the grain change direction. You can feel when the wood starts to tear. A power sander removes that feedback entirely. You're just grinding away and hoping for the best. The Mia Daiku craftsmen I've studied work almost silently compared to a Western shop. There's no screaming machinery, just the quiet whisper of a sharp blade on wood. And that silence isn't romantic nonsense, it's functional. When your shop is quiet, you can hear the wood tell you what it needs. You hear the difference between a clean cut and a tear out before you ever see it. The fifth thing you'll never see is wood stain or synthetic finish. Traditional Mia Daiku work is finished with natural oils, or in many cases, not finished at all. They let the wood age and develop its own patina over time. Hinoki cypress, which is their most prized building material, has natural oils that resist moisture and insects without any added finish. Sugi cedar develops a beautiful silver-gray tone as it weathers. The Mia Daiku believe that coating wood in synthetic polyurethane or lacquer is like putting a mask on it. You're hiding the very thing that makes it beautiful. I started experimenting with leaving some of my projects unfinished or using only a light application of natural tung oil, and I have to say, the wood comes alive in a way that 3 coats of polyurethane never allowed. You see the grain more clearly. You feel The texture. The piece actually changes and improves with age instead of yellowing under a plastic shell. Number 6 surprised me the most. You won't find a measuring tape used as the primary layout tool. The Mia Daiku don't rely on numerical measurements the way we do. Instead, they use a story stick method combined with a sumitsubo, which is a traditional ink line tool, and direct marking techniques. Every measurement is transferred directly from one piece to another rather than being read off a tape, written down, and then transferred. This eliminates an entire category of error. Think about how many times you've misread a tape, transposed a number, or been off by a 32nd of an inch because you rounded. The Mia Daiku method bypasses all of that. You mark the actual piece against the actual joint, and the fit is built into the process. I adopted this approach about 3 years ago for my joinery layout, and my accuracy improved almost immediately, not because I got more skilled overnight, but because I removed the opportunities for mistakes. The 7th and final item is rushed or green lumber. The Mia Daiku are legendary for their patience with material preparation. Historically, they would select trees and then season the lumber naturally for years, sometimes decades, before using it. A master carpenter might select a hinoki cypress log, knowing that his apprentice would be the one to eventually use it. They believe that forcing lumber to dry quickly in a kiln creates internal stresses that the wood carries forever. Naturally seasoned lumber, dried slowly over many years, reaches an equilibrium that kiln-dried wood never truly achieves. Now, I'm not suggesting you stockpile lumber for 20 years before building a bookcase, but I did start buying my project wood at least a year before I need it, and letting it acclimate slowly in my shop. The difference in stability has been noticeable, especially with species like white oak and cherry that tend to move a lot in the first year after purchase. Let me share some patterns I've noticed in my own work that this tradition handles completely differently. No judgment here, because I did every single one of these for decades. The first pattern is reaching for sandpaper as the default finishing step. Most of us sand because it's easy and it's what we were taught. But it produces an inferior surface compared to a sharp plane, and we rarely question it because we've never experienced the alternative. The second pattern is relying on glue and screws to compensate for loose joints. I did this for years. If a tenon was a little sloppy, I'd add glue and a screw and call it solid. What I learned from the Mia Daiku is that this just hides the problem. The joint is still weak. You've just added a crutch. The third pattern is measuring everything with a tape and trusting the numbers. We all do this, and we all have stories about being off by a 16th because we misread or mismarked. Direct transfer eliminates that entirely. The fourth pattern is rushing material preparation. We buy lumber, bring it into the shop, and start cutting the same day. The Mia Daiku would never dream of this. They let the wood tell them when it's ready. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. You don't have to overhaul your entire shop overnight. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This is a grain reading technique I picked up from studying Mia Daiku methods, and it has saved me more frustration than almost anything else I've learned. Before making any cut or planing any surface, take a small block plane or a sharp chisel and make a very light pass, just a whisper of a shaving across the end of the board in one direction. Then flip around and do the same thing going the other way. One direction will produce a clean, silky shaving. The other will feel rough and want to dig in. The clean direction is the direction the grain is running, and that's the direction you want to plane, cut, and work the wood from that point forward. The Mia Daiku do this instinctively on every single board before they begin any work. It takes about 30 seconds, and it tells you everything you need to know about how that particular piece of wood wants to be worked. I started doing this about 2 years ago, and the amount of tear out in my work dropped dramatically. It's one of those small practices that doesn't sound like much until you actually commit to it, and then you wonder how you ever worked without it. Before you head out, I want to make sure you know about my book, Kenji's Workshop. It goes way deeper than any single video can, with 100 Ancient Eastern Woodworking Secrets for the Modern Craftsman, detailed photos, and real hands-on knowledge you can take straight to your bench. If you want to bring these time-tested methods into your own shop, this is the guide to do it. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for spending time with me today. I will see you in the next one.